Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating esoteric cosmology outlined in our source text. We'll be looking at a book that delves into channeled spiritual interviews with extraterrestrial entities. We are going to impartially unpack a highly detailed, wild narrative, focusing on a formidable alien species that, according to the text, has actually interacted with human history. It's this complex, totally unique blend of cosmic conflict, spiritual philosophy, and ancient mythology. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this and take a quick look at the roadmap we'll follow to unpack this complex spiritual narrative. We'll cover 1. The White Tiger Alien, 2. Epsilon's Star of Reform, 3. Defenders of the Truth, 4. The Chosen Warrior's Power, and finally, 5. Earthly Reincarnation. Starting off with Section 1, The White Tiger Alien. To really understand this entity, we have to keep in mind the nature of the source material. It's a channeled spiritual interview. And the book provides a fantastic visual anchor for us. According to the text, this being does not take the form of your typical little green man or some kind of reptilian creature. Instead, it manifests as a legendary divine beast, the white tiger. The text heavily emphasizes that these beings are highly evolved, deeply intelligent, and completely distinct from the reptilian entities you usually hear about in this genre. Now, what's really interesting about this is a direct quote from the spiritual reading that perfectly captures this identity. When the interviewer first asks the entity to describe its basic form, it responds by connecting the English letter T for tiger to its identity. In the Japanese source material, this is referred to as byakko, the legendary white tiger. It's this surreal moment where cosmic identity meets earthly language. Moving right along to Section 2, Epsilon, Star of Reform. So you might be wondering, where exactly do they come from? Well, the text specifies their origin as the Epsilon star system within the Cygnus, or Swan, constellation. This system is huge, roughly 3 times the size of Earth. In this specific cosmology, it's known as the Star of Reform. Unlike other planets that might prioritize things like physical beauty or immense wealth, the Epsilon system is governed by strict order, decorum, and a massive emphasis on virtue. Because of this, their culture is incredibly regimented and dignified. The source material notes that when these beings stand before the divine, they actually don formal white garments. In their society, white is a highly respected color. It represents spiritual purity, strict adherence to order, and unyielding strength. That brings us to Section 3, Defenders of the Truth. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict of the narrative. If these beings come from such a highly ordered, peaceful society, why come all the way to Earth? The text sets up a stark cosmic contrast. On one side, you have the Epsilon white tigers, highly evolved beings who possess deep faith and serve as literal defenders of Buddhist truth. On the other side, you have the Zeta reptilians, violent, aggressive, dinosaur-like invaders who fundamentally lack spiritual faith. The white tigers were called to Earth specifically as a defense force to counter these Zeta invaders. Their role is fundamentally protective. The source material elaborates that they function as a sort of cosmic escort service for high-level spiritual figures. For instance, the entity claims their forces were responsible for protecting the mothership of Confucius when he traveled. They basically serve as a specialized cosmic countermeasure against forces seeking to destroy spiritual teachings. Which leads us to Section 4, the Chosen Warrior's Power. To achieve this massive defense effort, they rely on specific, overwhelming physical attributes. According to the spiritual reading, these beings are known as the Chosen Warriors of God, and they are quite literally built for brutal battle. The text details their combat traits: phenomenal assault power, incredible charging speed, massive jumping ability to pounce on enemies, and, get this, the capacity to breathe fire. So, the crucial point is that this brutal physical strength is not malicious. It's just a necessary defense mechanism. Think about it. When you're fighting literal dinosaur-like invaders who want to consume humanity, you need an equally terrifying force to push back. Their fierce, fire-breathing form is a specialized biological tool used exclusively to protect the truth. And finally, Section 5, Earthly Reincarnation. Let's move to and see how this builds into something on a human scale. The text tracks this soul chronologically, and it's quite a journey. Step 1, it originates in the Epsilon system. Step 2, it travels to Earth to fight the Reptilians. But Step 3, and this is where it gets incredibly fascinating, the soul reincarnates into a human body. The text claims this entity lived a past life during Japan's Heian period as a woman who was a master archer and a military logistics commander. Even in human form, she was organizing defenses, her earthly mission remaining exactly the same, defending Buddhism on the ground level to clear karma. It's an incredibly detailed esoteric cosmology, isn't it? We go from a highly ordered star system to a fire-breathing divine beast fighting space dinosaurs, all the way down to a female archer in ancient Japan. Which leaves us with this provocative thought. If our history and our mythologies, like the legendary white tiger, are actually shaped by cosmic defenders from distant stars, how much of human legend is actually a reflection of an alien memory? It's absolutely a fascinating concept to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. Chapter 2 of Ryuho Okawa's Reptilian Strike Back 2. Now, whether you're a massive UFO enthusiast or you just really love alternative history, you're going to find this fascinating. The text offers this incredibly specific look at one extraterrestrial group, the Zeta B aliens. We're going to unpack their unique lore, right? Their origins, their really bizarre biology, and the profound impact the text claims they had on our own ancient human history. To set the stage, let's just ask a question that kind of flips traditional historical timelines on their head. Who really taught humanity the foundations of civilization? I mean, who brought us mathematics, engineered the very first pyramids, and honestly, who figured out the fermentation process to brew the very first beer? Usually we credit the slow, steady ingenuity of ancient humans in Mesopotamia. But the source text we're examining today throws a massive curveball. It proposes a radically unconventional claim that a huge portion of this early human leap in ancient Sumer was actually the result of direct alien intervention.
Okay, let's dive into this. Chapter 2 shifts our focus entirely to the Zeta B aliens, and the text makes it explicitly clear right from the jump that unlike all those popular sci-fi tropes of conquering invaders you see in movies, the Zeta B are a remarkably peaceful species. In fact, they fundamentally despise conflict. They're characterized as this highly cooperative, gentle society that was forced to flee their home. They didn't come as conquerors, they came as desperate refugees just looking for a quiet corner of the universe to simply exist in peace.
Section 1. Unique amphibious appearance.
So to really understand who they are, we have to look at their biology. And the details in the text are incredibly specific. The Zeta B are described as an amphibious species, totally capable of living both on land and underwater, complete with functional gills right near their necks. But maybe the craziest feature is their vision. They have 3 eyes, and that middle eye actually protrudes outward, almost like the lure on an anglerfish. The text explains this as an evolutionary trait tied directly to their timid, non-violent nature. Because they are so averse to conflict, this protruding eye acts like a little periscope. It gives them 360-degree vision so they can constantly be on the lookout for predators creeping up from any direction. Oh, and they don't really use spoken words, they communicate primarily through powerful telepathy.
Now just picture this for a second. Imagine being an early human, living in the ancient Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, and you encounter one of these beings. The text suggests that when the Zeta B aliens arrived, they naturally wanted to swim or bathe, right? So they would take off their protective spacesuits. Ancient humans, seeing these amphibious, multi-eyed beings emerging from the waters, understandably didn't think, oh hey, extraterrestrial visitors. Instead, they mistook them for literal river gods or divine aquatic creatures. It just provides such a fascinating alternative lens to view the origins of ancient Mesopotamian mythology.
Section 2. Escape to Earth.
So why did they leave their home in the first place? The text traces their origin point to a planet near the Zeta star, way out in the Magellanic Clouds. Despite having this peaceful, highly advanced society, their homeworld suffered a pretty catastrophic fate. They were invaded by aggressive, militaristic reptilian forces. Unable and completely unwilling to engage in a brutal war, their civilization was devastated, forcing the survivors into a desperate retreat across the cosmos. Let's move to and see how this built, because they didn't come to Earth directly. Fleeing the Magellanic Clouds, their first major retreat was actually to Nibiru. The text describes Nibiru as the 10th planet in our solar system, and at the time it was serving as a sort of frontline base. But they were still seeking a truly safe, permanent sanctuary way out of reach from their conquerors. So a faction of them continued their wandering journey until they eventually discovered Earth. It was a blue, water-rich planet that perfectly suited their amphibious biology and offered a real chance for a new, peaceful beginning. And it's really important to note that this wasn't some massive colonization fleet darkening the skies. The text describes their arrival as a very small, incredibly vulnerable refugee group. We're talking roughly 40 to 50 individuals total. They showed up in what's described as a glowing, silver and orange circular ship. They were just a shattered remnant of a once great civilization, landing quietly on Earth to rebuild their lives in absolute secrecy.
Section 3. Surprising Gifts to Humanity.
Once they settled in what would eventually become ancient Sumer, they didn't just hide. To really appreciate their actions on Earth, the text impartially asks us to contrast the Zeta B with their oppressors, the Reptilians. Where the text describes the Reptilians as highly violent, predatory, and even a man-eating species that viewed lesser beings as livestock, the Zeta B are framed as entirely benevolent. They are a species that deeply values the teachings of the mind, prioritizing spiritual and intellectual cooperation above all else. This stark contrast really highlights the incredibly gentle approach the Zeta B took when they began interacting with early humans.
According to the source, the cultural gifts they gave Earth were literally foundational to human civilization. In science, they introduced humanity to mathematics, which the Zeta B considered the absolute basis for all scientific and technological advancement. In agriculture and daily life, they shared their knowledge of yeast and fermentation technologies. That means they are actually credited with teaching humanity how to bake leavened bread and brew beer. And over in architecture, they were the masterminds behind the construction of the massive ziggurats and pyramid-like structures of early antiquity.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the alleged purpose behind those architectural marvels. The text asserts that the ziggurats and early pyramids built in Sumer weren't merely tombs or monuments to human kings. From the perspective of the Zeta B, these massive, skyward-pointing structures were actually designed as vast facilities intended for interstellar communication. They were basically building ancient satellite dishes out of stone, attempting to cast their powerful telepathic signals out across space to connect with other lost peers or their distant home.
Section 4. Love, Mercy, and Strength.
As they integrated into Earth's history, their philosophy evolved. The Zeta B highly respected Earth as a planet that was progressing through those teachings of the mind. They held a deeply spiritual view that a society based purely on looking out for oneself is a society where, ultimately, no one is ever truly happy. They believed in collective well-being, empathy, and absolute pacifism. However, their tragic cosmic journey forced them to confront a really harsh reality about the universe.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core philosophical takeaway of Chapter 2. The Zeta B learned a painful existential lesson. Being completely nonviolent and relying solely on love and mercy actually made them incredibly vulnerable. Because they absolutely refused to fight back, their people were easily exploited, tortured, and enslaved by conquering species. They realized that their pure pacifism, without any ability to defend themselves, simply resulted in the suffering of their friends and peers.
Which leads us to a profound conclusion drawn directly from the text. Not only love and mercy, but a certain degree of strength is also necessary. This represents a massive evolution in the Zeta B's worldview. They didn't abandon their peaceful nature, but they realized that in a harsh, unpredictable universe, benevolence must be paired with the strength and resolve to actually protect that peace. Otherwise, it will simply be consumed by those who wield violence.
So, the crucial point we are left with goes far beyond just alien lore, and it touches on a very real human dilemma. As you reflect on the journey of the Zeta B, from their peaceful origins through their tragic exile to the foundational gifts they gave humanity, ask yourself, how do we balance a philosophy of peace with the strength required to protect it? It's a deeply provocative question that the source material leaves us pondering. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive into the text has sparked your curiosity to explore these ideas even further.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of esoteric history from the source material, Reptilian Strike Back 2. Now, you know the drill. Our goal here isn't to take a stance on these beliefs, but just to break down the incredibly vivid narrative the author lays out. We're going to look at the text objectively and structure this cosmic, mythological case study because, honestly, it reads like an epic sci-fi saga. Let's get right into it.
So, picture this. Earth is being totally ravaged by brutal wars, and to stop it, giant dinosaur-like beings descend from the stars. But get this, they aren't here to conquer us. They're here to preach peace and faith. It sounds like a total paradox, right? Well, this bizarre imagery is the exact hook of Chapter 3, and it outlines a surprising spiritual mission that totally flips our expectations of what a so-called monstrous alien arrival might look like. And that core idea is exactly where our focus lies today. The title for Chapter 3 literally translates to Zeta Aliens Who Preach Faith to the Lord.
The text actually channels the consciousness of these Zeta aliens, giving us a highly detailed chronological account of their intervention on Earth. It's a super specific, structured narrative, and we're going to map out exactly who they were, why they came, and the dangerous philosophy they were trying to stop.
Section 1. Arrival of Zetas in Africa.
The source material is remarkably specific about the timeline here. According to the text, this whole cosmic intervention took place roughly 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. The narrator describes arriving on Earth right after the Ice Age ended. The planet was warming up, and they specifically note seeing this lush green landscape covering Africa. It really is a vivid setting for what's about to be a very dramatic entrance.
Now, what's really interesting is how their technology is described. The Zetas didn't just show up in your classic flying saucers. The source explicitly describes them riding in massive, black, square UFOs, descending right over the African continent. It's this incredibly imposing, almost brutalist aesthetic that perfectly sets the stage for the beings who were piloting them.
And who exactly was inside those black square UFOs? Well, the text categorizes these specific Zeta aliens as Godzilla types. They possess this gigantic, super intimidating stature, resembling massive dinosaurs, and they walked with a heavy, bipedal movement, walking upright and just stomping across the land. The physical contrast here is absolutely key to the story. You have these terrifying, prehistoric-looking beasts, but they're armed with highly advanced spacefaring technology and a deeply spiritual purpose.
Section 2. Reptilian Hegemony Dispute.
So, a crucial piece of context is found in this quote right from the text. While observing Earth, the Zetas noted that the earlier extraterrestrial pioneers, specifically a faction known as the Reptilians, had developed a terrible reputation across the cosmos. The Zetas saw them as a brutal, completely out-of-control species. Earth, under their influence, was just trapped in a state of chaotic warfare. To give us a framework for all this chaos, the text draws a really fascinating parallel. The author explains that the Reptilians were locked in these gruesome internal wars over faith and hegemony. The text explicitly compares these conflicts to the mythological battles of ancient Egypt, specifically that legendary violent struggle between the gods Osiris and Set. So we're talking about an era of intense ideological and physical warfare.
Section 3. Warning on Evolution Supremacy.
This contrast gets right to the philosophical heart of this esoteric history. We're looking at a direct ideological clash. On one side, you have the reptilian mindset, which the text says was obsessed purely with physical evolution, dominance, and strength. On the other side, you have the Zeta mission, which was entirely focused on introducing balance through faith, love, and mercy. It's a classic dichotomy, but it's framed within this massive galactic power struggle.
Let's define this dangerous ideology the Zetas were so concerned about. We can call it evolution supremacy. According to the source, the Reptilians prioritize survival, strength, and continuous advancement above absolutely everything else. To them, the universe was a pure meritocracy of power. Anything that hindered physical or strategic advancement, like compassion for instance, well, that just had to be discarded.
Now, it's really telling how the text spells out the danger of this mindset. The quote reads, "The Reptilians feel that a heart of love and mercy is a proof of weakness." This tragic misinterpretation is exactly what the Zetas recognized as the fatal flaw in reptilian society. By viewing love as a vulnerability, the Reptilians were basically trapping themselves in this endless, vicious cycle of war and spiritual degradation.
Section 4. Preaching Faith to the Lord.
The text details how the Zetas felt this profound sense of duty. They knew they had to step in, admonish the Reptilians, and correct the mistakes of this fierce race. But here's the genius of their approach in the narrative. They used their terrifying Godzilla-like forms deliberately. They didn't come down to wage war. Instead, they used their intimidating physical presence to command enough immediate respect and fear from the Reptilians so that they would actually stop fighting and just listen to the teachings. Let's break down their chronological strategy. Step 1. Arrive in ancient Africa in those striking square UFOs. Step 2. Observe the brutal Osiris and Set-like wars for hegemony. Step 3. Use their massive presence to admonish and check the violent behavior of the Reptilians. And finally, Step 4. Once they had their attention, preach a new philosophy emphasizing faith to the Lord and cosmic balance.
The text introduces a really compelling concept to explain how they governed, the idea of a two-faced god, kind of like the Roman god Janus. The author explains that to guide a violent species, you really have to show a strict, terrifying face to establish order and enforce boundaries. But crucially, you also need to possess the gentle, merciful face of a loving deity.
It's the synthesis of these two extremes that actually brings about true spiritual evolution.
And that brings us right back to the most important philosophical takeaway from the Zeta's teachings in this chapter. They wanted to fundamentally rewrite the reptilian code. They needed to prove that possessing a heart of love and mercy is not a liability. In fact, it requires immense strength to choose compassion in a universe that constantly pushes you toward ruthless survival. It's not a proof of weakness. For the Zetas, it's the ultimate proof of higher consciousness.
Which leads me to a final question I want to leave you with. In this mythological case study, highly advanced, deeply intimidating beings traverse the stars just to teach that compassion is the ultimate strength. Taking a step back from the esoteric context, how does that philosophy apply to our own human history today? Are we balancing our own rapid evolution with the mercy required to actually sustain it? It's a powerful thought to ponder. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. I hope this explainer helped clarify the fascinating narrative within. Until next time, keep learning and keep questioning.
Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today's explainer is, well, it's a wild one. We're unpacking a text that is truly mind-bending, scaling from the absolute farthest reaches of the universe right down to the battlefields of ancient Earth. Specifically, we're diving into the 4th chapter of a really fascinating source document. It details the existence of an entity known as the Guardian of Justice. And get this being's resume allegedly includes commanding a literal intergalactic space force, paving the way for major world religions, and even reincarnating as some of the most legendary samurai and warlords in human history. It's a wildly massive scope, so let's get our bearings.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 1. The Eternal Guardian, 2. Supreme Space Commander, 3. Paving the Way, 4. Earthly Reincarnations, and finally, 5. True Nature of Divine Beasts. Let's jump right in.
Just looking at the table of contents here, you immediately get a sense of the sheer, unprecedented scope of Chapter 4. I mean, in a single continuous narrative, the source text connects what it calls Zeta Star aliens and the god of the back universe directly to Indian mythological gods like Vishnu. And then it seamlessly bridges all of that into the souls of historical human warlords. It's kind of like a unified theory of cosmic and earthly justice.
Section 1. The Eternal Guardian, a matter of scale.
So right off the bat, the source text completely shatters how we humans normally think about time. It has this incredible quote, "I experience 100 million years as if it were a single day." Think about that for a second. It frames this entity not as a standard human soul that occasionally pops up to do great things, but as this vast, ancient protector who views entire geological epochs, literally eons of planetary evolution, in the blink of an eye.
And to put a specific pin in that timeline, the text states this being awakened exactly 150 million years ago. Its primary directive back then? To protect the creator figure known as Elohim, and to guard the Earth against malicious extraterrestrial forces. So yeah, this entity has essentially been on a continuous defense mission since dinosaurs were walking the planet.
Moving on to Section 2, Supreme Space Commander, Rulers of the Sky. The source gets incredibly specific here. It doesn't just describe this guardian as some, vague, floating spiritual presence. Instead, it describes someone acting functionally as the supreme commander of a space defense force. The entity explicitly refers to itself as the Air Force of the cosmos, actively patrolling the universe and literally fighting off invading forces to maintain order.
And this is where it gets really visual. The text points out the entity's insane adaptability. Because, let's be real, when you're fighting a cosmic war, a standard human body isn't always going to cut it. The text notes that these guardians can take on incredibly diverse, shape-shifting physical forms, depending on whatever the cosmic need is at that exact moment. They might manifest as giant pterosaurs, massive ape-like, actually King Kong types is how they're described, or amphibious Oannes beings, white tigers, or even dragons. They engineer their physical manifestation to perfectly match their combat requirements.
All right, Section 3, Paving the Way, the Indian Mythology Connection.
The text draws a super vivid contrast here. On one hand, you've got the Hindu god Vishnu, who traditionally is depicted as very calm, meditative, usually sitting peacefully on a lotus flower. Contrast that with the highly active, skybound nature of our guardian entity. While Vishnu focuses on supreme ideals and grounded, meditative states, the guardian acts as the kinetic, moving force, literally soaring through the sky to get the physical and spiritual work done.
But here's the catch. They weren't competing, they were collaborating.
Specifically, the source claims this guardian entity actively cooperated with Vishnu. The guardian essentially ran point, doing the heavy lifting and spiritual ground clearing to literally pave the way for the future descent of Buddha. They were effectively setting the stage for major spiritual movements here on Earth.
Which brings us to Section 4, Earthly Reincarnations, Gods of War.
When you look at the timeline, the overarching theme of justice and protection threads through all of these completely distinct historical lifetimes. From guarding the planet 150 million years ago, to supporting Vishnu, to manifesting as Prince Jeta to protect Buddha's followers, all the way to becoming some of the most famous warriors in Asian history.
According to the reading, this soul actually manifested in China as none other than Guan Yu. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Three Kingdoms period, you know Guan Yu is revered almost as a god of war and righteousness. The text aligns Guan Yu's immense physical strength, his unshakable loyalty, and his incredibly strict code of justice perfectly with the core characteristics of this ancient guardian.
Later on, the soul crosses over to Japan, reincarnating during the highly chaotic Sengoku period as the legendary warlord Uesugi Kenshin. Kenshin was so formidable and so devout that he was historically worshipped as the living avatar of Bishamon Ten, the Buddhist god of war. So once again, we see the entity acting as this fierce protector, using military strategy and actual combat to enforce a divine sense of order on Earth.
Finally, Section 5, True Nature of Divine Beasts, Beyond Animal Spirits.
It is absolutely vital to point out how the text explicitly separates these beings from, say, simple animal spirits. When we hear the word beast, we might automatically think of a lower-level earthly animal. But in this context, a divine beast is a highly advanced exception in the spiritual creation of the supreme being Elkantere. They aren't just animals. They are exceptionally powerful entities specifically created, chosen, and tasked with the absolute heaviest defense duties in the universe. They are the ultimate cosmic enforcers of justice.
The text goes a step further and categorizes these divine protectors into distinct functional domains. Our guardian, as we've learned, primarily rules the skies, acting as the Air Force. But there are others, possessing equal counterbalancing power, who rule the land and seas. They manifest as those four-legged tigers, lions, or the aquatic Oennes beings we mentioned earlier. It really is framed as a fully comprehensive, multi-domain defense grid for the planet.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If a single entity's pursuit of justice literally spans 150 million years, shifting seamlessly from epic space battles to ancient historical battlefields, well, how does that reframe the way we view the historical heroes who fought for justice right here on Earth? Are the great protectors of our history just brilliant humans? Or are we sometimes seeing the momentary earthly manifestation of a vast cosmic defense force? It is a massive, paradigm-shifting concept that the source text challenges us to consider. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today, Focused Learners. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.